Hello there, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, right after this. You know, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Simply go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. All right, as promised, Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
Federal debt tops $30 trillion, added $1 trillion in less than 2 months. That'll get your attention, huh?
$30 trillion, Andy. I've been covering federal spending for the last 20 years or so. I guess back to the beginning of the George W. Bush administration, and I remember back when I was writing about the total federal debt being about $5 trillion. That tells you in the span of 20 years, gone from $5 trillion to $30 trillion. At some point, obviously, the numbers become just too colossal to sort of comprehend what we're talking about there. But perhaps the most important point of this, we were at $29 trillion. So in that month and a half, we managed to reach $30 trillion.
Wow.
Part of that is because we'd sort of been on a debt delay because all debt had been piling up while they were fighting over the debt limit late last year. But still, when President Biden started, we were at about $28 trillion. So that's more than $2 trillion worth of debt in his first year alone. And that, of course, is clearly a record pace. If we continue at that pace, he will shatter all previous records for debt during a term.
All right, now, where do we get the money? Do we print it?
So one of the things about this, that $30 trillion, and your listeners will see a couple of different numbers out there. $30 trillion is the total federal debt. It includes about $6 trillion that is the government owes itself. So when it borrows from the Social Security trust funds, for example, to pay for basic needs every year for the last 30, 40 years, those were IOUs. So those show up at the debt. The key figure is actually a slightly lower number. It's between 23 and $24 trillion. That's the total debt held by the public. That is the debt that the federal government owes to creditors, people who own savings bonds, big foreign banks, big U.S. banks. That's sort of the key there. And so it's over the next X number of years, we owe that, plus whatever else we rack up in the yearly deficits from here on out. One of the staggering figures about this is that interest costs on that debt, of course, as you can imagine, a big chunk of change. Interest rates had been so low for the last 3 or 4 years or so that interest costs, even with that massive debt, interest costs hadn't actually been that bad. But obviously, interest rates are now rising. Interest costs are going up. The monthly payments are going up on that, and there are projections that if at that size of debt, and given what we expect over the next 2 to 3 decades or so, by the middle of this century, 50 cents of every dollar that the federal government collects in taxes will go to payments on the debt, which basically means, all of the other things the federal government wants to do, Medicare, Social Security, defense, education, border security, you name it, environmental protection, all of that is going to have to fight for that other 50%. The thing about people on Capitol Hill make this point every time we have a debt limit fight. Oh, that's not okaying future spending. It's paying for the spending that we've already put in the books. Well, here's the problem with that, right? Is that those interest costs, that half of all federal tax dollars that we're going to be spending on interest, that's stuff that you and I enjoy now. It's going to do absolutely nothing for people who are alive in 2050, who are going to be paying for all the stuff that we racked up now because we, as a society, couldn't control our spending impulses now. It's a real problem, and both parties point the finger at the other party. Oh, you wanted tax cuts. Oh, you wanted more spending. Something needs to change, because at some point you do it. Nobody knows where it is, but at some point you do hit a level where it becomes unsustainable, and at that point things start to cycle very badly.
All right, speaking of money, Trump fundraising juggernaut has more money to dole out than the DNC and RNC combined. That's remarkable. Do we know how much he has?
He had, as of December 31st, he reported 122 million in the bank accounts of his half dozen or so political committees. The Save America PAC being by far the biggest of those, but he's got several other political committees. Between them, they raised about $50 million in the last 6 months of last year. A very strong pace, and thanks to money that he had left over from 2020 and that fundraising from the beginning of last year, among all of his committees, 122 million, which happens to be about $1 million more than, as you point out, the RNC and the DNC, the two big national parties combined. The implications to that, there are many. One, just for the president's own purposes, former president's own purposes, Rick DeSantis, anybody, Ron DeSantis, Rick Scott, anybody who might be looking at a challenge for the primary in 2024, look at that tally and says, oh, boy, I'm starting really far behind. I may have 10, a senator may be lucky to have 10 million sitting in his or her bank account right now. And President Trump's sitting on 12 times that money. So that's one thing. The other thing is, that comparison to the parties is no accident. He has more money, or basically twice as much money as the RNC has to splash around and do with what he wants. There are limits to how much he can contribute directly to another candidate, but there are plenty of other ways to spend that money to influence races or to just sort of keep it in his own pocket and throw it around to scare other primary challengers. So a lot of different things he can do and a lot of power that comes with that money.
All right, before I let you go, what are you working on?
So it's actually, you and I think just last week talked about a Coffin smuggler who got nabbed trying to carry 2 illegal immigrants stuffed inside of a coffin through a checkpoint in Texas. This time around, it's 14 illegal immigrants who were stuffed inside of 2 porta potties that were found on a trailer on the back of a pickup truck cruising down in southern Texas. And the agents, sort of interesting, the agents got a call about a drone incursion in southern Texas, and they went out to check it out. And one of the ranch hands said, well, what we saw, there's a truck driving on the property that's trespassing, shouldn't be here. The agents went out, found the 2 porta potties on the back of the truck, opened them up, and 14 people inside of it. One of the things I do, I track how much folks are paying for this journey. And they were paying, between $12,000 and $13,000 for the trip here. That's about $1,000 more than had been typical for the last year or so. So the rates seem to be increasing. And if I spent $13,000, I might expect better accommodations than me and 13 other of my closest friends stuffed inside a porta potty.
Yeah, not a coffin or a toilet. All right. As always, thanks for your help, Stephen. Read all of Stephen Dinan's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. Take care.
See you later, Andy.
Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Dinan. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.